explore women in many ways. And, I think if motherhood becomes this sort of obsession, if you've become a mother, it's sort of a pattern and theme that you see everywhere. And your book starts with Lena, who doesn't want to be a mother, right? Can you really talk about how that came to be? Essentially, why would you write? Most people wouldn't, and you don't explain why. So can you really talk about that, about Lena and her desire not to be a mother?
Sure. Is this on? Yeah. I first thought about writing this narrative of a woman who doesn't want to be a mother because of a personal sort of experience that I had, or a personal choice that I was making. So since I was 16 years old, I've always wanted to adopt a child. And I never had this physical urge or maternal feeling that I had heard other women beautifully describe. And so I thought that meant there was something missing in me. And when I began the adoption process, I found myself writing an apology letter. It was titled, "To My Forsaken Fetus, parentheses, female." And the novel has a letter with the same title, though not the same contents. And I realized that I was feeling guilty for my choice, being unconventional. Even though I wanted to be a mother, it was just not a particular kind of mother. And so from that, I wanted to write. And when I was writing that letter, the character of Lena was sort of the voice in the back of my mind saying, it's okay, you don't need to justify your choices. And I wanted that narrative to exist, a woman who doesn't want to be a mother, and she doesn't necessarily need to explain why.
But you also, but in the book, she doesn't want to be a mother, but she gets, as you say, at one place, you wanted to complicate things, right? And you get her, and she gets pregnant. Yeah. I would like you to actually read that passage before the passage, this thing, and then we can start talking more because it does complicate her life. The guilt and her own feelings sort of then manifest in a completely different way in the book, right? But can you start by reading that?
Yeah, so this is an excerpt from the moment where Lena has found out that she's pregnant, having never wanted to have children, and she hasn't yet told anybody. To whom Lena belonged, and when the transfer of autonomy took place, was no novel deliberation. Gawking construction workers broke her childhood, one whistle at a time, ruining Snow White's tune. From their fenced-off, elevated view, they ripped her apart by sight, devoured her with vulgar kissing sounds, spat out what she was supposed to swallow. That the woman inside her body was insignificant. And instead of protecting that vulnerable inner person those collective thieves pickpocketed, she defended the tangible, which was easier to see but harder to steal, her physical body. Hands firm on the steering wheel now, the distant view of building sites unhinged her still. Less familiar was feeling that same visceral reaction towards Ishan, shamefully equating a construction worker's leer with her husband's desire to procreate. What a cruel result from years of subtle, socially acceptable violations that the two requests of her body could unionize in this harsh way, could produce the same fierce guard over herself. Back off, it's mine. She should have told Ishan she could get pregnant, that she had, that he'd made his way inside her and produced an ally, another being staking claim. Only there was no unselfish way to say so. It was easier for all parties concerned to believe Lena couldn't conceive than to know she didn't want to.
What I also found interesting, and when you're listening, is the idea of, in the book that you have this whole aspect of Lena, of everybody trying to get Lena to conceive. You've got her mother-in-law, Meenakshi, Auntie M. You have her husband, Ishan, who sort of batters down her defenses and has agreed that, I mean, that's a conversation they have, right? Why she should not have children, why she does not want to have children. And she sort of has 4 points about why, right? And there's this other aspect about her own mother and her experience, a mother who dies, right? And I wanted to ask you really about the idea of agency. You know, we were talking about agency right now with the young person who's at the Neeraj, who's in charge of the thing, he was saying his mother's living with him, and it isn't, you know, there is a sense of, you know, in the sense that, you know, mothers intrude into people's private spaces. You don't really have the same freedom anymore. And I wanted to ask you really about the idea of this, the fact that mothers and agencies over their children, but the sort of almost tyrannical control that children also have over their mothers. You know, Meenakshi, while she's this very dominant mother-in-law, has also had erasure herself. So can you talk a little bit about the dynamics?
Yeah, I mean, before agency of mother and child and vice versa, agency over one's own body and choice, right? So I think sometimes when you come to motherhood without even having had agency over the decision, then how the dynamics play out between the mother and daughter and vice versa is significantly impacted by that. So you may have resentment, or you may have, you know, rebellion against that. And I think between Lena and her mother-in-law, Lena's sense of agency is very much around my body, my choice, my autonomy. What is this child going to take away from me? Whereas for her mother-in-law, she doesn't see it like that. Of course, she's a different generation. And for her, the erasure of her agency and her identity has been nearly invisible to her, right? Yeah. So she seems fine. But of course, it's just a subconscious removal of her own agency. And she sort of directs her energy towards her son and wants to establish her dominance and relevance in his life as he starts to, you know, journey towards his own parenthood. So yeah, I think just slightly different dynamics of what we feel we are owed, what we are allowed to do, and how we, I don't know, make those decisions.
Yeah, and also, I mean, you know, it's also interesting because, you know, while there is this aspect of this big question of motherhood, which is, you know, whether there is, in Lena's life, you know, how she is choosing to be a mother, how she doesn't for a very long time tell Ishan that she's pregnant, how there is, you know, other things, and I don't want to give away the story. But the question, in this book, while you're debating the idea of motherhood, the best parent really is the father, right? The best mother is really the father, because the mother is absent, right? And when you talk about the aspect of motherhood, parentage, as well as and in this case, her father, and what role he plays in this.
I think it's such an important point there, because we talk about, the novel is trying to talk about intentional parenthood. It just so happens that parenthood is more largely associated with mothers. Yeah. And I think, you know, through not necessarily absent fathers in the novel, but fathers who are present, but not really engaged. Or, you know, generally fathers who are given a bit more permission to shirk responsibility, whereas women are held to higher standards. You know, who's taking their children to school and packing the school bag, and who's in the chat groups coordinating the things. All these things tend to fall on women. And I think the conversations around motherhood absolutely need to involve men. And I think that's where there is the void, because so much falls on women, therefore women have this additional pressure, they feel scrutinized for their decisions around parenting. It all seems to be a burden that a woman carries for motherhood. But in fact, as you see in the novel, when you have fathers who are deeply intentional, involved, also sacrifice themselves for their children, these things that we associate with women and mothers, it completely transforms the lives of the children to have that. That's what I was trying to show.
Can I also talk to you really about this book itself? Okay, it is a book, and I know that this is a favorite bit with Uttama, where she talks about writing this book. It's been written over many years, right? And then when she sent it out, very much like a child onto this thing, it was not received with love, let's say. So, Uttama, do you want to tell us a little bit about that and the rejection? And please tell us the number, okay?
Sure. So it took me 7 years to write the novel, mainly because I was working a full-time job, and so I used to write it once a week, every Saturday. And after those 7 years, when I started sending it out, first to agents, because I wanted to have a literary agent represent me. And I received 88 rejections from agents. And I get asked about this a lot. You know, the first 10, 15, they sort of hurt your heart. Yes. By the time you're at 75, you don't even notice. But I think what I really felt in the writing of this novel, less so about, you know, whether it was good, how I wrote it, I really wanted this narrative to exist in the world. I believed in the story. And because I am a little bit of, I was thinking of this in your session about home. I'm a little bit from nowhere. You know, I'm Indian by ethnicity. I was British by nationality. I was living in Singapore. The book is about Dubai. And because of this, I kept getting the feedback that we don't know where to place this book in the market. But, you know, hopefully everyone here knows that stories transcend those geographic boundaries, and it was a matter of persistence and patience. And making peace with rejection, sort of removing my ego a little bit.
And I'm glad you brought that up because, you know, there is this rejection which you sort of feel in, and we've talked about this before at another session where we talk about rejection and, you know, first-time writers and women, and why do women feel rejection in a particularly personal way. It's not about the story, it's not about the writing, but it's us, right? It's sort of a rejection of yourself. And I wanted to ask you, you know, in some ways, the book has sort of laid the ground for you for motherhood, because motherhood and children, I mean, children are the worst sort of rejectors of your life. They sort of take it over, and whatever you do is wrong, okay? So how much of that sort of professional thing of, you know, not taking it personally, because that's what gentle parenting is about, right? Not taking it personally. I don't like you, but that's just his feelings, okay, not you. But, you know, that is, I mean, that how much of that sort of really prepares you for the deep rejection and the deep loneliness that somehow motherhood becomes?
Yeah, you know, I thought that I had steeled myself against rejection and that feeling of not being enough. But I think for me, the journey to parenthood in two ways has been an extension of rejection. One of which was adopting a child during the pandemic across countries as an OCI holder.
Oh my God.
And, you know, legally fighting a battle to actually adopt my daughter. So there was a persistent fight even to become a mother after writing a novel about not wanting to become a mother. Mm-hmm. And then, yes, of course, the act of parenting, I think the rejection and the feeling of inadequacy that can come from being a mother is just at a whole other scale.
Yeah.
And, you know, like you said, the mothers are expected to be, you know, everything. We have such narrow definitions of you're either gentle parent or authoritarian. You either sleep train or you don't sleep train, or you feed the ragi or you don't feed the ragi. I don't know. You just
either your earth mother or your what is it, tiger mom?
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
Right.
So there's so many, and I actually feel this motherhood as a subject in literature, motherhood as an identity for a person, feels all-consuming and so constraining. You know, I think we would do so well to just take it off the pedestal And what is motherhood, right? It's just mothering. It is an action that you do in relation to the child you've been given or your circumstances. And I really think it would better serve women to know and be allowed to have motherhood be one aspect of who they are. But I think, coming back to the point about rejection, when you, especially as a parent, there's so many moments that you feel like, oh, I should have done better, and that continues over and over. And I'd like to say it prepared me for it, but I'm not sure that it has.
I don't think anything does, but I think that, the aspect of wanting to do better, I mean, I think the idea of sort of, and in many ways, that's reflected in Lena's conundrum that she comes to later in the book, where she has a secret, where she's pregnant, and she has a secret which she cannot tell anybody, but wants to do better. Her mother, herself wanting to do better and sort of taking herself away. Her mother-in-law, who wants to do better too. There is this aspect of the burden of doing better, and it always mostly falls on women's shoulders. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think, you absolutely see that in all the female characters in the novel. And it is almost by the nature of what is put on women, whether it's about their roles as mothers or how they should appear or what their bodies should be like. Women are on the defense. They have to protect. I think they feel the need to protect their choices because they're judged so harshly. Yeah. So, Lena's protecting her choice to not want to be a mother, and then she falls pregnant, and she's sort of feeling like, okay, I'm still allowed to do this. And both things can exist at once, right? You cannot want something, but then you have the experience of physically carrying it in your body. I think with her mother-in-law, she is, I often say she's the feminist of this novel. She is the woman who just does as she wants, probably after many years of having been judged so harshly. And you see that as a mother, she's very unapologetic about her choices, and she doesn't really feel the need really to explain them to others.
Because I wanted you to talk about the opening scene where you first find out that, and it's a really wonderful opening scene where you first find out that Lena doesn't want to get pregnant or doesn't want to have a family, and it is over a it's over dinner, okay? And there is this line where comes later where you say mother-in-laws were the killer whales of the Indian Ocean, intelligent enough to devour their prey in one stealthy opening of the mouth. Is that me? Sorry. And I want, the agency at that point of time to eat or not eat. So can you talk a little bit about that, about how this big thing, which is sort of stamped in your DNA, and if you go against it, is sort of it's difficult, right? How does that sort of play out in the daily actions of your life?
Yeah, it plays out in the minutia,
and I love that. Whether she can eat chili, whether she cannot.
So she's on so Lena, the central character, lives with her in-laws, and the way that it has come out that Lena is even thinking about pregnancy is because her mother-in-law has snooped and found a pregnancy test in the dustbin of the bathroom. But one cannot ask a mother-in-law what she was doing in your bathroom in the first place. But there's all these small battles in domestic life that really, I think, reflect the wider pressures. So, will she eat don't eat the chili because it's bad for your womb, or once she finds out she's pregnant, are you going to quit your job? This sort of micro lens on every small decision that is made within a household. And I do hone in on the household, and I feel like within our home spaces is where there's so many gendered expectations. You often goes completely unnoticed by men, quietly tolerated by women. Who's making the dinner plans? I often say, these things are not genetically in me. I wasn't born knowing how to, form a chat group with my child's school friends. I don't know, but they're small things that we just, I think, take for granted. And the accumulation of that leads to, I think, women having a different position, disposition, and orientation in the house. We orient ourselves for the needs of other people. And I think that's something that Lena is really battling against in the household.
Sort of trying to keep alive, trying to still keep her identity.
Yeah.
While on the other hand, there is her mother-in-law, whose identity is because she has Ishan, right? And there is this really powerful passage in the book where you actually get to see her mother-in-law's reality too, where she comes first in a university exam and then.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
She comes first in the sort of state board exams for maths, and she comes home with this result and, shows it to her parents, and her mom's in the kitchen cooking, and she sort of says it to her mom, puts it on the kitchen counter, and by the time she's changed and come back, there's like a stamp of dal on the certificate, and it was considered irrelevant, insignificant.
Yes. Yeah. And there is this aspect of what I think you wrote this really powerful piece in the TOI about the decision to adopt, about the loss of children, very much, in some ways what Meenakshi's parents go through. And you say that it is, whether it is IVF, IUI, what you're saying. And can you talk a little bit about that, about just the deep sadness which we just sort of saying how that personal experience is sort of reflected in the book?
Yeah, I think grief and loss is a theme in the book, but in relation to motherhood and pregnancy. Lena is a character often fighting against her mother's superstitions, which she mocks. But of course, her mother-in-law comes from a time when stillbirths were normal, and people sort of just accepted them and carried on. And for me personally, I had made a decision to adopt, and I began that adoption process. And then for the love of my husband, I also decided to try to have biological children, and carried and miscarried 3 children during that time. And I think, what that experience really brought for me and into this novel was that 2 opposite things can be true. And you cannot want something, but you can also grieve the loss of something that's already grown inside you. And that motherhood is, it's nuanced, it's complex, it's beyond polarities. I think there's absolutely a physical experience of motherhood that one only knows if one has that physical experience. But really what I wanted to show was that whole range. We are so quick to
judge.
Yeah, make presumptions about, whether one wants to be a mother or not, what kind of mother one wants to be. And I really wanted to also show the darkness. There's dark sides of motherhood. There's rage. There's, coming back to the erasure of oneself. And, even physical pain. Like, nobody asks a woman. The expectation when a woman gets pregnant is, oh, you must be so excited. And the woman's probably like, this giant thing is going to come out of my body. There's almost no acknowledgement that it is a physical risk to your life. And in those experiences I had of carrying and miscarrying children, I did risk my life. And I had to choose whether I was going to save my life or not. And I absolutely chose myself. And I think there was even some shame in saying that at a point of time. That I chose to preserve myself. But I feel like that's a thing women are often not allowed to say.
You're not, I think. And I think that there is an erasure of yourself every day, as well as an erasure of an invisibility, invisibilization of yourself. I mean, I know that's not a word, but
I like it,
essentially,
I like it.
but essentially, you're sort of in the background, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you see that in the characters too. You know,
Yeah.
Lena's resistance to be invisible and wanting agency of herself, her mother-in-law's retreat into being invisible and trying to make herself relevant.
Yeah. And if I have a minute, I can just read the little
Could you just
passage
read that
that's on
last bit,
erasure.
and then we're going to open it up
Okay.
for question.
This is now after Lena's pregnant and everybody knows. Lena needed her good, uncommon sense to define her own terms, devoid of that horrid word haunting parents everywhere, sacrifice. Treacherous term from the Latin, to make sacred, glorified to fool women into forgetting their emptinesses. No wonder Auntie M clutched onto her child with such insecurity. That's what made her a mother, the only identity she hadn't yet shed. Family first, read the caption, a most wondrous way of relinquishing prior personas. Have you ever imagined such giving? No, of course not. The best ones, those premium parents Auntie M wished Lena and Ishan to be, the kind she assumed herself to be, they endured abdication in silence, erased themselves over and over and over.
Thank you, that was beautiful. So we're going to open it up for questions. Are there any questions, or I can keep going on? Yeah.
Hi, thank you for that. So I think, I'm a mother and I have 3 kids, but how much of it is about the template and how much of it is about, I don't know if we had the vocabulary for any of this earlier, so you just did what you were told or you imagined was the script really. And now I feel women have all of that, right? So, which is where the agency comes from. Of course, yours is from a very personal experience, and which is why you dug in and did this. But a lot of women in the past may have felt the same things, but I don't think they knew how to define what was going on. Which is why now you find that a lot of girls are deciding for themselves and taking these decisions. So, in your research and stuff, did you go there? I mean, did you figure out why choice is such a big deal now?
I mean, keep in mind, I started writing this 10 years ago. So even 10 years ago, the narratives around this were much less than they are now. I think you see it on social media, you see it in mainstream media even a bit more. You have celebrities coming out talking about it. So there is that. And I think one of the ways in which maybe a generation that didn't have the vocabulary or the financial independence or any of these things that go into making choice, I think their way of establishing that autonomy or trying to reestablish that autonomy has often been linked to how they mother. And that's kind of, this is my dominion now. And so that's the sort of difference I noticed when I spoke to women who had either wanted to make that choice, whether they did or not, across generations, that no matter what choice you made, it's not necessarily at all about which choice is right or wrong, but how significant this decision or not being able to decide was, and then how that played out in their lives in different ways. And one of the themes that comes up all the time, or one of the words, is the feeling of that would have been selfish. And that holds true to the women that are of my generation that I'm talking to. And before, it was like, oh, there's no way I was going to do that. I would have deprived the family of grandchildren or this and that. But even to women I speak to now, they still have to face that selfishness accusation, not the reality. That's an accusation. Yeah.
This is less of a question and more of something that I thought about. You remember how you mentioned that you had 88 agencies that you applied to, right? And how most of them didn't get back to you. Well, do you think that was because of you or because they were mostly dominated by men that didn't think that this was a universal experience? Because if 85 of the 88 were women, then they would probably take your book and be like, you know what? Maybe one person in every country in the whole world has experienced this and it's worth a shot. So is it really you or is it them?
I wish I had a better answer for you, but they were predominantly women agents. And I don't know the answer to that question, but I think there were definitely women who related to that narrative and thought it was important. But the thing to know when you're pitching a story to agents or publishers, suddenly it is about the book as a product and not the story. And where I was getting rejection was, we don't know where to place the story. She's Indian, she's half Fijian, she lives in Dubai, and so it was more about that. But it's a really good point, because when I was sending it out, and I actually had one agent who said, I have had the exact same experience as her. There's a particular thing that Lena faces, which I won't say here. And she had had nearly the same experience as her and said, but I just don't feel up to being able to represent it. And I felt quite disheartened by that, and I thought, if women don't make space for these narratives, I don't know who will. And my agent is a man, Kanishka Gupta, who is, saw the story and something in the story immediately. So sometimes it's beyond gender. It's so ingrained in us that men and women, it's not that only men are perpetuating that. I think it's, yeah.
Hi, I'm also curious, how do you not lose hope? Whether it's the 88 rejections, whether it's what you shared in your personal life with the miscarriages and then the battle with the adoption system, that how do you sort of, not want to just change everything or like give in and, make the character or place them in a different city or, those editorial changes, or whether it's in your own life that, okay, fine, I won't adopt then, or I'll give in and have a baby. So something like that, like how do you keep that resilience and that hope within yourself?
So I think there's only two things in my life that I have been stubborn about. It's not a character trait of mine, but adopting a child and writing a book, those were two things. And I made them central to my identity, and therefore all my actions were moving towards bringing that to life. When it comes to writing and that process of facing rejection while trying to get published, in that case, it was, I just took the time to make sure the story and the writing was at a quality that I knew was publishable, because I read a lot, right? So you always kind of know. I think the trouble comes in haste. People want to, especially nowadays, you want to get it out, you want to feel some kind of reward. And I think when any writer, not just me, every writer that writes does this miraculous thing of working towards something that you have no guarantee is going to be out in the world. So that already builds something in you. But I just held steadfast to like, okay, I've got the story to that point because I took so long to write it. I made sure that the quality was there. And then I started to just understand how the industry works and what is the strategic reasons this isn't happening. You sort of separate, like I said, the story is a story and the story is a book that's a product. But yeah, you do have a sort of, people thought I was ridiculously optimistic, like waiting 6 years for the adoption thing. I took a sabbatical, I left my job for a while. I was in Delhi for a few months fighting like legal cases. And I think that's just come from, deeply wanting something, and nothing comes easy. We're so used to a time now with social media. It feels like everyone just has these amazing lives and, you can get there really quickly. You can't. And of course, I have a fantastic support system, and surround yourself with people that, believe in that as much as you, or at least believe in you.